Good evening and a very warm welcome to First Issues. In a recent interview at the Africa Development Week, the African Union Commissioner for Trade and Industry, Fatima Haram Achil, shared that unlike Europe's 60% or Asia's about 40% intra-regional trade, African countries trade at a low 12%. And even though Africa ships over 80% of its exports overseas, mainly to the EU, China and the US, this accounts for just 3% of global trade. The eyes of Africa appear fixed on foreign markets, although the continent now boasts a GDP in excess of $2 trillion, a labor force estimated at 382 million people, a growing middle class of over 313 million consumers, and consumer spending breaking through the $1 trillion mark, according to the Business for Africa Forum. The World Bank's Annabelle Gonzalez writes that by bringing staple foods from areas of surplus production across borders to growing urban markets and food deficit rural areas, Africa can indeed feed Africa. But at present, only 5% of Africa's imported cereals come from other African countries. Why are African countries so reluctant to trade with each other? The 2011, 2012, 2014 and 2015 winner for Africa research at the JSE Spire Awards, Celeste Foconia, answers that question tonight, while also sharing what investment opportunities have been identified on the continent. Welcome back to First Issues. As Africa analyst for Rand Merchant Bank South Africa's Global Market Research team for the past 9 years, Celeste Foconia shares with us that part of the reason for low levels of inter-regional trade on the continent is due to the fact that African countries knew little about each other's markets in the past.
I think that was more prominent a few years ago. I do think that African corporates, wherever they are on the continent, do realize that they have to take more opportunity within our continent. So we've actually seen trade levels improve amongst countries. So your exports to other countries within the region, it's rising significantly. A very good example is the East African community. The trade within the region is much higher with one another than with the Western countries or even your Asian countries. So we've actually seen somewhat of a shift. Of course, the reason I think why companies wanted to rather go and invest in the West, because it's less risky. And personally, I think even though we're all Africans, ultimately, we don't really know our continent that well. So for instance, a very big retailer in Africa, the CEO literally goes into the country to see what it's like, what the people are like, what they would need. You can't literally just read on a paper what the country is like. You actually physically have to go in there. And that's what corporates have been doing over the past, well, at least the 10 years I've been working on the Africa strategy. So we can actually see a significant shift into more regional trade than just going outside the borders.
So what opportunities are there for expansion on the continent?
The fact that there's 54 countries with different sectors featuring in each country, I think there's a lot of opportunity available. It's looking at where the regulations are easier, where the environment is friendly to get in, whether you can import or export. So there's a lot of variations that you have to look at before you go into the rest of the continent. So you first have to start there, and then the rest will come. So firstly, looking at who's the most favorable business environments in Africa, it's definitely your small southern African nations, South Africa, Mauritius, Botswana, Namibia, still very good business environments. It does start getting trickier as you go up into the continent. But we must also remember that the rest of the continent have also large markets, large populations. So that's also where opportunity lies.
And some of the better rated investment countries are way up north. I think Rwanda is an upcoming a success story.
Yes, looking at Rwanda before we go into the North African countries. Rwanda is still a small market. It's got 10 million people, but what the big difference is that they are the fastest reforming economy in the world when it comes to its business environment. They're a landlocked country. They have no resources, as many other African nations have. So what they've decided is that we need to make ourselves investment friendly. So you can open up a business very easily in Rwanda. You can get investment in and out very easily in that country. And also the tourism is fantastic. The retail sector is starting to boom. So a lot of opportunity, I think, in such a small geographic country. And of course, its close proximity to the rest of East Africa.
So looking further north, would you point to that? You're pointing to that as a potential opportunity, but which other specific countries could people look to?
If you look at the top 10, for instance, if we look at the typical methodology that we use as researchers, we've chosen to look at more opportunity than just risk. If you had to look at just purely risk-wise, you obviously look at the countries that have good sovereign ratings by the S&Ps, Moody's and Fitches. So then you will start looking at your Botswanas, Namibias, Mauritius, etc., as I've mentioned earlier. But of course, we also look at market size, so who's got the most purchasing power to their disposal. Nigeria is a very good example. Then we also look at growth rates. Some countries have been growing above 7% and more compared to your more southern African nations that's seen its growth and is now stabilized around at 3 and 4%. So mentioning a few other countries, I think it's worth going into West Africa. Nigeria and Ghana always usually does well when we look at that typical methodology. However, we must currently realize that because of commodity price downturn in Africa, those countries are struggling, of course. But we have to look at Africa long term. People are not investing in Africa for a year or two. They're investing longer than 5 years at least. So that's why we try and tell our clients, just look a bit further than commodity cycles and political cycles like elections. There's always more potential on the other side of that.
Welcome back to the show as we look at opportunities for trade and investment to be found in Africa. Having previously looked at the countries that are currently looking more attractive for investment, we now ask our analyst if there are any industries that are faring particularly well when it comes to regional expansion.
We actually did a survey on R&B clients, looking at where they are going into Africa, how much money they have put in, just basically the footprint. And it turns out of all the sectors we looked at, all the way from resources down to agriculture, etc., it was the retailers that have the biggest footprint in Africa. So I can mention a few retailers, but we all know the big South African retailers. But just looking at, for instance, coming from Botswana, a Choppies moving into the rest of Africa and even into South Africa. So we can see that it's not just South African corporates that is taking this plunge going into the continent. And also not just the only springboard. Other countries are springboards now. Botswana, for instance, Kenya for East Africa, Nigeria and Ghana for West Africa. So it's very interesting to see what the opportunities are there for other corporates, ex-South African.
What are the risks, though? I know you said you guys focus more on the opportunities, but what risks should an investor be on the lookout for?
Unfortunately, with Africa, we all know the risks are abundant, but I mean, with risks come hopefully high returns. But the biggest problem we have facing now at the moment is access to financing. If I had to look at Africa 10, 15 years ago, people would have said it's politics, worried about governments, governance, etc. It's definitely still a problem, but it's access to financing to get your money in to these countries and to get your money out. So what we mean by that, certain countries have a large risk associated to it. I can use similar examples as what we see in Southeast Asia back in 10 years ago, etc. But we can just see most of the African countries are B-rated or B-plus rated countries according to the sovereign agencies. So very risky to get your money in there. Will you get the credit to be able to go into these economies? That's still okay. Getting your money out is becoming a massive problem in Africa. It's actually increasing the problem. So what we've seen now, for instance, with countries like Angola, Nigeria, they are dependent on an oil price or what the oil price is doing. Now with the oil price being so low, less dollars in the market, so your liquidity is much less. It's difficult to get your dollars out of that market when there's hardly any dollars left, for instance. Also good examples are Ethiopia, Malawi, always still difficult to get your money out. We see a little bit in Mozambique at the moment as well with liquidity issues, but these countries again go in cycles. In the next few years, we'll see the liquidity will increase again in Nigeria, Angola, Mozambique because of commodity prices increasing. We just must always remember every country works so differently. We cannot paint Africa with one brush. We've got different currencies, different currency regimes, etc.
In which ways then can firms mitigate this challenge and extract their money from these riskier and now cash-strapped countries that our guest has detailed? Is there some way to incorporate these financing challenges into an expansion or investment strategy?
Well, I would like to say it's, thank goodness, not my problem in the bank to sort out. We highlight the risks. As a macroeconomist, I go and say these are the risks, but of course we've got ways to mitigate it. Whether if you've got currency problems, whether you hedge your currency, etc., whether you will go into the options market or into the NDF market, for instance. I mean, just very small examples of mitigating these risks. But I think the major one for Africa as a whole and globally is getting political risk insurance. Most companies will invest into political risk insurance to be able to mitigate against any maybe political risk, whether it's contractual risk, etc. So there's definitely ways and means to be able to cover that risk associated to investing globally, not just Africa.
Going forward, what insight can you give us into what's happening opportunities-wise and what we can look forward to?
I think Africa, even though currently it's not doing well, it's because of commodity prices, still a lot of opportunity available. We still have fantastic demographics, a significantly fast-growing youthful population. Therein lies some of its own risks. However, demographics, looking at resources, even though it's sometimes known as Africa's Achilles heel, it's actually, we still have an abundance of resources. And it's also almost shifting more from your mining, your more minerals to water, agriculture, so we need food. And especially that demand that is going to come eventually, it's already there, but going to grow from China, from India, populations that go over 2 billion already. So we're going to see opportunities in that. And of course, being here at the Botswana Stock Exchange conference, we can also see that the capital markets, the financial markets are growing significantly. So the things that weren't growing well a few years ago, which were mainly because Africa is still dominated by resources, we are starting to see them emerge quite significantly in most of the countries that we look at.
It is so encouraging to hear such a positive outlook for intra-African trade, and I'm sure it will be even more uplifting to see developments within this space. Up next, however, we look at Lebanese business etiquette practices. Welcome back to First Issues, where in this segment of our program, we continue our look at different business practices from across the globe. If you're a Motswana who has ever left the continent, then you are probably familiar with the frustration that comes with being labeled a South African. Or worse yet, when people cannot recognize that Africa is made up of different sovereign states and even more different peoples. We here at First Issues, therefore, are going to do our part to improve cultural sensitivity, to ensure that you do not become guilty of performing similar faux pas when conducting business in foreign countries or with people from different places. In focus this evening is Lebanon, a country in the Middle East bordering the Mediterranean Sea between Israel and Syria. It has a population estimated at about 4.5 million people, with 18 religious sects of Christianity, Islam and Judaism officially recognized by government. Approximately 90% of this population lives in urban areas such as the capital, Beirut. As complex as it is to distill the cultures and practices of a region, we have invited Lebanese businessman Nicholas Zakem to the program to give us some insight into the business relational practices of Lebanon. The business culture in Lebanon is said to be multifaceted and rapidly changing because of its demographics. The country is reportedly eager for foreign investment, and many companies have adopted a Western approach to business, as even our guest tonight attests.
The business in Lebanon is very competitive in any market, in any domain. When I conduct a business in Lebanon, is very competitive. Because Lebanese have been all over the world, so they adopt a lot of ideas from abroad and they bring them to Lebanon, and so you have a lot of variety of ideas and so on. But at the same token, there's a lot of bureaucracy in Lebanon to conduct a business. It's not simple. And like I said, there's a lot of competition in any business you're intending to do in construction, in hospitalities, in medical affairs, anything you know you need to conduct in Lebanon is very competitive. And sometimes, the pity about it, Lebanese are clever people when it comes to business, but the pity about it, you need to be connected politically in Lebanon, which is something here in Botswana much different. In Botswana, it's all about merit, and you have the ideas, you have the know about, and you'll be able to succeed and excel in whatever you wish to do.
Our guest has lived in Botswana since 1990 and is the owner of Zach Construction and a restaurateur, among other things. That's the lovely setting of our conversation this evening. Despite the decades spent in Botswana, even financing football teams such as Gaborone United, he is of the view that he's still up to date with business practices in his native country, enough to advise any entrepreneur looking to do business in that country.
Look, I'm not trying to discourage anybody going to Lebanon at this moment in time. The only issue, like I said, is they are very welcoming. The people in Lebanon are very welcoming. And like I said, they love new ideas, they love new culture. Lebanese are known, they interact very well with foreigners and with people. We have a lot of variety in Lebanon in terms of race, people coming from different parts of the world. I mean, Lebanon population as original Lebanese are 3.5 million. We have more than 2 million foreigners in Lebanon who interact with the Lebanese. They work on a different level. Some are entrepreneurs, some are footballers, some are doing housekeeping. So we have a lot of people from different nations and a different domain. Yes, in Lebanon to set up a company is not difficult. It's simple as Botswana. All I'm saying is a bit of bureaucracy because Lebanese, always you get better depend on who you know more and how you are connected. In the government itself and in official day-to-day running, there's a lot of bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy can slow a process and can frustrate an investor or can frustrate an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur or investor, they want things to be run smoothly and promptly because, there's no time to waste. When you invest or you come to establish, you want things to be quickly. You want your communication to be at best level. You want your transport to be at its best level. You want your hospitality there to be all perfect. So people can be encouraged to come and, establish and so on. Also, what works in Lebanon, which is something good, is the free currency system we have in Lebanon. So there's no restriction on Forex, in and out. In terms, even any investment you can do, you can take it after you pay definitely your taxes. So there's no restriction. So there will be no worries. You can deal. In Lebanon, we deal with different currency, even in cash. We deal with the Lebanese pound, but also people can use euro or dollars to go and do their even a grocery shopping. So which is good. I mean, that facilitates things. And people don't worry. In Lebanon, you can walk out with your cash if you want. Nobody asks you, no restriction completely. And this system has been there since 1943 when we took independence. Actually, it made Lebanon at one time the pearl of the Middle East, the Paris of the Middle East in a sense. People go there, they enjoy themselves in terms of social life, and they can do their business and they can be able to, remit their money with no restriction.
So culturally, because it's so multicultural, has it become very westernized? Is it suit and tie, formal meetings, formal greetings, or? Yeah,
in a meeting, everybody goes there with the formal, always formal. I mean, you could see even when you walk into the restaurant lunchtime, 90% of the guests in the restaurant are with a tie and a suit. Yeah, actually, sometimes the image also, people look into images that people are dressed. And if somebody dressed well, knows how to match the clothes, then at least they have the idea where they are going, where they're heading. And surely, you as a lady, when you want to meet with somebody, you want also somebody who look somehow dress well, look neat in a way that, oh, this guy knows what he's doing.
Quintessential, an international company that looks to support businesses through the challenges of globalization and internationalization by offering services such as language lessons, cultural awareness training, translation and interpreting, write in one of their country profile online articles that the Lebanese are proud of their tradition of hospitality and that one should therefore not see being invited quite quickly to someone's home for something to eat as strange. A tradition of hospitality that the First Issues crew got to enjoy firsthand with a generous offer to be wined and dined at one of our guests' eateries.
You know what's good about Botswana, especially when I came, Botswanas are a very welcoming nation, very welcoming people. From day one, like I said, I was coming for 6 months from Kenya. I came from Kenya. It was like a quick mission and lasted 26. Then you feel the people are very welcoming. Botswanas are very tolerant people, which has made them fantastic. I love the way they conduct themselves between themselves. They are not violent. They can listen to each other very well, even when they disagree. Even when they disagree with somebody, they don't have that negative attitude or jumpy attitude, which is good. Even when I started working and established my company, Zach, in 1992, it was simple, it was easy, and you can reach to anywhere you want. All you have to do, pick up the phone, or take an appointment, you can go. Anybody at the government, at any level, you can meet them, which should make it easy. They make you feel welcome at home. There's no bureaucracy, you don't have to wait. I'm sure things have changed now with the years, but it's still very, very, very acceptable comparing with other places. I've been other places in Africa myself. Botswana is far ahead in terms of welcoming foreigners and in terms of welcoming investors, and with less bureaucracy.
That is good to hear, because some of the people we've spoken to haven't really had that same kind of mindset. But I guess you're comparing it with other African countries and not necessarily with more sophisticated economies?
No, it's not compared to other African countries. Even I mean, look, surely we are not going to compare Botswana to the Scandinavian country in terms of things, because bear in mind, we are only celebrating 50th years of independence. I mean, you look back to Europe, their history there, they've been there for hundreds of years, we've been independent, you know. So when you do comparison, you compare to people within the same ambiance, same atmosphere. Surely I can't. So we're going to look around Zimbabwe, Zambia, even South Africa, even Swaziland or Lesotho. We go further to Namibia. Botswana is sitting very well within that region, and in the term of conducting business or other things, you know. So yeah, so you do comparison to people within your region or people who practice the same thing.
We hope you enjoyed hearing an encouraging account of conducting business in Botswana as much as we have, from someone who has clearly had a positive experience of doing just that. Until next week and another issue of interest, I, Namito Samakula, the team behind First Issues and our sponsors, First National Bank, wish you a good night and pleasant viewing.